0950 hours of August the 27th of 2024. There are a lot of people who want to make contact with ETs, and many people who want to do it in an awakened state capacity. And with this tutorial, I aim to go ahead and share with you all something that will help you get a feel for your incorporeal self. This is basically a sense of self that goes beyond the physical reality, and is a perspective from which you can experience many different ways of existence, since many of the beings that a lot of people desire to connect with don't even exist the same way we do here in humanity. There are things that happen in their reality that simply don't happen here, and devices and items that exist there that don't exist here, in part because not all of their technology is physical. So you would have to go ahead and look at the scope of what you perceive and believe in things to be, and rebuild that for it to be inclusive of part of the lives of these beings. And that's what I'm going to break into detail here. People talk about how you create your reality with your beliefs. In this audio, I'm going to break into detail all of what this is and how this works. And we're going to start by talking about the full entity and what I call the body of consciousness, which are basically two different terms that I use to refer to the same thing. This is the entire scope of every single thing that's a part of your experience in any given moment, any piece of consciousness. And with that said, I wish to go ahead and note something. The way I operate, I don't look at reality, I don't look at myself as my, a human being in a reality. I look at myself as a reality itself. I look at myself as an entity, as consciousness. There's my human expression and perspective within that reality. But ultimately, I see myself as the reality itself. So, that said, we go back to the full entity. I see that as anything and everything that's a part of my experience in any capacity in any given moment. Hence, the body of consciousness. Now, from my perspective, this breaks into two pieces. That which is my higher fractal consciousness, which is consciousness that I basically, in a way, tell to be a certain way or do specific things. And that forms the framework of my physicality, that forms the character base of people all over my world, and consciousness beyond my world as well. And then there's that which is my lower fractal consciousness, which is the remaining consciousness. That consciousness I take the perspective of, I feel it, I live it, I experience it. Now, I could go ahead and talk a whole lot about the higher and lower fractal consciousness, because there's really a lot to share in context to those two. And I have two previous audios in which I break this into more detail. The first one is the Consciousness Handbook material from, I want to say, just over a year ago. And the second is a tutorial that I talk about how to go up and down the densities. And there I talk a great deal about the higher fractal consciousness and the lower fractal consciousness, because the key to going up and down the densities is moving consciousness between the higher fractal consciousness and the lower fractal consciousness. Because the lower fractal consciousness is your free consciousness. It's open to being whatever you choose to experience in the moment. And the higher fractal consciousness is tasked consciousness, where you've set its character to be a certain thing. You don't feel it. It works automatically. It does its thing. And, to move up the densities, you're literally feeling your way around yourself, your full entity. which is the higher fractal consciousness and the lower fractal consciousness put together. And because you live life from the perspective of your lower fractal consciousness, going up the densities is being more of yourself. So since your being from that perspective is the lower fractal consciousness, the more higher fractal consciousness you put into the lower fractal consciousness, the higher density you are. So how do you put higher fractal consciousness in the lower fractal consciousness? Again, it's feeling your consciousness. The higher fractal consciousness operates in the background. You don't feel it. Why have higher fractal consciousness? So that way you can have an adventure for yourself and not focus on creating it. That way you can have a character set within which you can explore. And you can get to experience what it's like to be certain ways or be certain things. Such as, in my case, a human, where about 3/4 of my consciousness, give or take, is my higher fractal consciousness, and the remaining 1/4 is my lower fractal consciousness. Now, I want to go into a little detail, because a lot of people wonder, is the lower fractal consciousness the same thing as the physical mind, and the higher fractal consciousness the same thing as the higher mind? And in a way, yes, but not strictly so, because there's the definition of what the higher mind is, which really the higher mind is kind of the rest of your consciousness, but this could be inclusive of non-physical perspectives. Or, well, non-physical perspectives, I don't like that word, because, things are not strictly physical. And you could make an argument that things are not physical per se, even here. And then, of course, there's perspectives that are beyond sixth density. So, and it'll be a whole nother audio for me to go into densities and how those work. But I do break those into detail in the Consciousness Handbook material and in going up and down the densities. So to go ahead and have your reality be with certain characteristics, look at your choice array. The choice array is a term that I use for the entire array of choices that you make in a given moment with respect to your being. So much of this ties into beliefs, but it can also tie into choices that you make directly from the heart's desire. Like, what do you want to be? What do you want to do? And you can look at that choice array, feel your being within, as some people would say, and look at how your reality mirrors that. So the more connected you are to yourself, the more you'll understand why your life does what it does. And the more of your consciousness that you feel to the point of being able to move at will, the more consciousness is your lower fractal consciousness. And that consciousness is no longer tasked to be a certain way. You've freed it up to be whatever you want in practice. That's what it means to move consciousness from the higher fractal consciousness to the lower fractal consciousness. So, and trust me, I have a really good point, really good reason to break all of this into detail, because with this, if you look at that choice array and what you task that higher fractal consciousness to be and to do, again, life is as you have it be, and Source, in a way, does what you tell it to do, because the spark, which is another word that I use for Source, in reference to the spark of life, is what your essence is. You are that source, and it lives from the perspective of your lower fractal consciousness in all instances. Now, this is a timeless thing, so this is the case with your fractal, this is the case with all fractals. We are all literally one, and that's a whole nother audio for me to go into detail with. But I do talk a bit about that in the How the Heart Works audio. But the reason I bring this up is to highlight all of your choices and what those mean, because no part of your reality exists without your choosing on one level or another. That's worth remembering, because when we go to look at the idea of ET contact, and you want to go ahead and make contact with beings of another world, you're going to have to look at your choice array, because if your choice array sets up a body of consciousness that is not inclusive of part of the being or being patterns that these entities use, they will not be able to fully express themselves in your reality. Remember, your reality is your consciousness. Your consciousness is what you choose. If that doesn't include their consciousness, then you're not sharing pieces of consciousness, and you're not sharing a life in which you can interact with each other. Now, when Rob channels Aradif, he brings through, give or take, 5 to 10, maybe 12% of Aradif's consciousness, depending on how much of Aradif's consciousness he has opened up his consciousness down here too. If you want to up that to 100%, you would have to look at the being patterns of the entity with whom you're wanting to connect, and opening up yourself to life being able to be what those being patterns are. And with that expressed, let's go into some fundamentals of consciousness. And the first one is the idea that the one is all. This is Source. Source literally lives as every conceivable thing, including you, and is your spark of life, the magic behind you that inspired the guy to say, I think, therefore I am. And in that way, that same Source, which I also call the heart, is the heart of every single thing in your reality, and every single entity in your reality. All of the atoms, all of the people, all of the animals, the planet, all of the stars, each and every single thing, living or not living in the conventional sense, individually, and every conceivable group of all of those things, and all of them put together as one. So in that way, they operate collectively, by group and individually. And ultimately, they share a core with you. And this is why I call it the body of consciousness, because if you look at your choice array, both from the heart, your heart both in alignment, with your heart's desire and based on beliefs that you've picked up in life, you can spot that everything moves with your being and with your choice of being. So when you believe in life to be a certain way, or you conceive of life to be a certain way, and you make that part of your choice array, you make that your existence, your reality and your life will perfectly mirror that. How does this work? It all starts with the heart. Every choice starts at the heart, and then it expresses and ripples in everything. Because the heart is the spark of life of everything. So that will be where the bias of each individual thing is inclined to go. This is something that each of you will have to go ahead and find out and see for yourselves in your own way and in your own time. Because there's nothing that replaces observing this. But if you open up to Source, if you open up to consciousness, it has a way of speaking, and it really speaks for yourself when you see it. So the more connected you are with yourself and all of the ways in which you choose and believe in life to be, and then you're also open to what life is doing and what life has done, the more you can see how closely it mirrors your own being, and the more you can recognize the implications of that knowledge. and the more you can ultimately get in touch with your incorporeality. Because if we go a few moves ahead of that, one of the things that you're going to learn is that because everything mirrors your choice array so closely, including that of physics, you can ultimately tap into yourself enough to see the framework of your reality within yourself. You can see how life is as you have it be, that in that way, Source is what you believe in and choose for it to be. This is part of what I like to call the absolute free will. You know, the saying, God gives everything free will. Why is that? Well, because his life is your life is his life. Now, God is a term that I also use for source. God and source, they're the same thing. They're the spark of all creation. They're omnipresent. They exist in everything. They are all things. And this free will is absolute, and that free will is inclusive of the idea of taking on and letting go of limitations. That way you can experience life however you want. We talked about how to take on and let go of limitations. Again, that's tasking your higher fractal consciousness to be a certain way, or untasking it. And this is so that Source can experience every conceivable experience in all of creation. Because that is how much, that's the curiosity that never dies. And that is also the token by which Aridif says that you are loved. The universe itself is created from that love, therefore you are loved. He says that because of that undying curiosity, and that Source wants to experience it all. And perhaps that goes into the very essence of what love is, the idea of wanting more, the idea of desiring to experience more. And with this thing being seed to all of creation, you can start to understand why everything is what it is and why everything is unlimited in a fundamental sense, even though you might be experiencing a limited scope of it. So the more you get in touch with your being within, and the dream state really helps with this, and then you can start finding the parallels in the awakened state. The more you get in touch with yourself and what you choose to have life be, what you live within, what your consciousness is doing when there isn't physical things around it, as well as what it's doing in the physicality, and what it believes in, what its program responses are, the more you can go ahead and look at that choice array in a given moment and reset it, re-choose the way you choose to be. And this is of such great significance because by resetting how you choose life be, you can ultimately have what you choose life be to be inclusive of what other beings choose life to be. That way you two can choose the same life in which you can interact with each other. And that is the key to ET contact. Either in a channeled state with partial choice array matching, or in the ground state for face-to-face contact where the entire choice array is matching. And actually, you can even do it with partial choice array matching. And this actually happens amongst many humans, where you're able to see some of who somebody is. You can talk to them, but your beliefs are not open enough to hear the full scope of who they are. And it's an interesting phenomenon to see that, and I've experienced that my fair share of times. So there you go. There are some basics of consciousness that you can use for ET contact. You can actually use these for a lot more than just ET contact. And also, one more detail for me to highlight. The idea of face-to-face contact is kind of an interesting thing because the being patterns of many of the entities all over the galaxy differ greatly. Some of them do not necessarily have to have a physical avatar. If you wish to create with them in a non-physical capacity, use that sense of self from the incorporeal sense, your sense of what you are, what your essence is, an essence that can express in any capacity, in any physicality. Feel what makes you you, the things that you love, the things that you enjoy experiencing, and feel that beyond the physicality, or at least the parts of it that do go beyond the physicality, the seeds to these expressions. And then when you go ahead and share yourself with non-physical beings, let your non-physical self express around you. And when you get used to the idea of being more than just a physical being, you can start to experience yourself beyond the physicality that you know, or that you use regularly as part of your existence, if you use one. This tutorial actually doesn't just work for humans. This can work for extraterrestrials as well. So if you're out in space and you want to make contact with humans, or you want to make contact with another race, this same construct works, where you look at your choice array, you look at the way you know, you feel, and you perceive life to be, and you do some introspection. You get to know your consciousness, and you get to know the consciousness that you're wanting to connect with, and then you open your ground layer self. The ground layer self is, for me, I refer to that which is my physical mind as my ground layer self, because my physical mind is not necessarily physical, because it technically has the ability to go experience other worlds with different choice arrays that are different from the physicality of the human collective. And so that causes it to not make sense to me to call it the physical mind. It makes more sense to call it the lower fractal consciousness, or the ground layer. And so my awakened state ground layer, with the ability to go ahead and redo the choice array on the ground layer, you can experience with your ground layer whatever you want. UFOs with different kinds of technology, inner technology, new phenomena in physics, atoms doing things that they shouldn't be doing in theory based on the physics of Earth, so on and so forth. And even, this doesn't just include physics, this includes character traits. So what are these character traits? Well, there are things that can physically happen on Earth that simply don't happen. Because they're not part of the thematic choice of how people have life be. There are certain things that you might experience people doing in your own fractal of consciousness, in the version of the collective that you experience, where of all the things they could do, they do the specific things that they happen to do. And the same thing goes with physics, where there are certain physical phenomena that occur, and certain physical phenomena that can occur that you never see occur. And so, by expanding the scope of both of these things, you could allow for more human consciousness to express, and for more consciousness in general to express. You can start seeing physical technology that uses the same laws of physics that we know very well here, but that we've just never seen before. So there's a lot that you can do when it comes to opening up the scope of how you have your life be, both character-wise and physics-wise. And this you can use to go ahead and be able to experience more consciousness, including consciousness of extraterrestrial origins. After all, extraterrestrial consciousness, let's say that you have beings that exist pretty similarly to Earth beings. They have different physical structures, different, physical builds, and them walking amongst Earth humans is a very different thing from the life that, like from my own perspective, that's a very different thing from the life that I've lived here. I've lived with humans. I haven't lived with Bigfoot or with the Saurians or with the Yaw-Yell or some of these other beings. So just their avatars physically would be a bit different from the beings that I know and that I love and that I work with so much. So you really are getting used to a different, a bit of a different flavor of existence. The more you practice with this and the more you feel yourself, the more contact you can make and the more consciousness you'll be able to experience. And so I don't know if I ever finished my line of thought with the idea of beings that don't have that kind of avatar. But if I didn't, when you open up your scope of being to infiniteness, because on a fundamental level, this is one fundamental I missed. That fundamental free will means that every single thing in your reality, in the fundamental level, is limitless and can be or do anything. And so you set out the limitations for it within your choice array. You define its limitations, you define its character, and in that way, it defines your reality as you define it. And so if you cut loose and you open up to just how limitless all of your reality is, this makes room for incorporeal existence. And this demonstrates the idea that life, in a way, is pure thought and is pure consciousness. And that pure consciousness can be physical, but it doesn't have to be. And that is what I mean when I say at its essence, or on the fundamental level, everything is limitless. Because the only reason it would exist in a limited way is because that's what you're having it do. But you don't have to do that. You can go ahead and open up to the limitlessness in things to where it ceases to exist physically. And this can allow you to go ahead and feel your essence as an entity and feel yourself in a very deep way. Feel the part of you that can express outside of the physical reality, and also experience other consciousness that also expresses in a non-physical way. This would be a great way to go ahead and actually visit the Arcturian consciousness with your ground level. And boy, I tell you, now I haven't experienced that in the ground capacity, to 100% extent at all. But that's a lot different from life like this. Boy, it's really something else. So if you guys want to go ahead and bring that idea for a spin or visit other consciousness that exists, in not particularly well-defined physics, you can go ahead and use this and do exactly that. Now there are more things in the break, for me to break into detail, such as the idea of connecting with angelic consciousness and oversoul consciousness and things like this. But to do that, you're moving 100% of the higher fractal consciousness. You're having 100% of your consciousness be lower fractal consciousness. Why is it called lower fractal consciousness and not higher fractal consciousness? Well, because you're moving it to your ground level. So that means all of the consciousness of your full entity is on your ground level. And that's non-physical being, because now all of the character traits of your reality, except for the thing that makes you, are no longer defined. And let's go ahead and, with that said, talk about the template layer self. This is the perspective from which Aradif works. The template layer self, as Omni very brilliantly said, is the template of your existence. It's the self that can express in any physicality. So when you tap into all of the different expressions of you in any conceivable set of physics or any conceivable character of reality, and you see all of the things that those expressions have in common, you've just found the things that make you you. Where you express in all of those different media, in all of those different forms. The signature that remains constant is your template layer self. And so in that way, you can really feel what makes you you. And this is such a useful thing because you can find your spirit, if you will. And when I say your spirit, again, I'm talking about the template layer self. I'm talking about the thing that goes beyond any physics. Some people also call this the individual soul. Now, the oversoul is a broader scope of this, and if you want to understand that more, I talk about that in the handbook and moving up and down the densities. So if you want to go ahead and work directly on the oversoul level, I would go listen to those 2 audios. Otherwise, I will probably make a dedicated audio for connecting with oversoul consciousness and oversoul families and grand families all the way up to the archangel level and source. I'll talk about those later. But in short, you're choosing the band within which you express, where you can task your consciousness to be with a specific character trait, or with many character traits, all of which define your soul essence or your non-physical self. So basically, you look at the traits that all of your expressions and all of the conceivable physicalities have in common, and that's your template layer self. We'll now imagine yourself resetting those traits and choosing to exist as a different template layer self, as a different individual soul. If you want to do that, you can do that. That is what we talk about when we talk about oversoul consciousness. And you can go ahead and experience so many different perspectives that way. For me personally, I'm perfectly happy with my template layer self as it is for a good long time. And so I'm going to be exploring that for a long time. But for any of you who want to understand different oversoul consciousness and archangelic consciousness and all of these other layers that are above 7th density, you have the ability to do exactly that should you want to. Now there's one question that comes up. If I were to go ahead and decide to explore oversoul consciousness, and I were to go ahead and shift my template layer self from being one thing to being another, how do I not lose myself? Well, that's a good question. I want to go ahead and break that into detail. Your heart is your source level of consciousness. The deepest levels of excitement come from right there. And on that level, you know what you want to explore. You know what that looks like. You know what that feels like. And in that way, there's a direction of curiosity. And only from disconnecting from that would you lose yourself. But here's the thing. All of wisdom is always available to all of creation. All of wisdom is always available to source in any given moment. And you can go ahead and integrate and use that wisdom at your leisure. The same goes with love. The same goes with consciousness in general. That's part of the absolute free will package. So when you recognize that, you can know that in all the ways that really matter, you're never really lost. So if you ever feel lost, remind yourself of this fact. And when you reconnect with this idea, you can remember what you wanted to do as an entity. So if you did change your template layer self and you're not happy with that, then you can go right back to what you were doing before. And this is why what I say about the non-physical sense of self, or this is what I'm saying about the non-physical sense of self. This goes all the way down to your source and what you want to do as source in the moment. All of creation is available to me in the moment. What do I wish to go ahead and explore? And the more in touch you are with that, the more in alignment you can move with that. This goes into the idea of the heart's desire and following the heart's desire. And ultimately into the saying, follow the heart. Ultimately, the heart of all things will do whatever you tell it to do. But if you move with your heart's desire, with what you want to do on that level, and you match the harmony of your mind and your higher fractal consciousness with your heart. Now, the higher fractal consciousness is tied to the lower fractal consciousness by the heart. So if you move, if you match the harmony of your mind with the harmony of your heart, and you do that 100%, then you are literally dancing with your reality, and your reality moves with your being so perfectly, and everything is always in place for you to fulfill your heart's desire, because you've matched your mind's desire to your heart's desire, and you've matched the movement of your mind with the movement of your heart and your heart's desire. This is what Type 1 beings do. This is what Type 1 beings are. They've aligned their higher fractal consciousness and lower fractal consciousness with their heart's desire. And they've aligned their choice array with their heart's desire. So they are literally choosing in alignment with the heart, and therefore in alignment with their entire reality. And that's what creates that dance. Cheers, everyone. We love you very deeply, and by tokens that we've expressed in this audio, you are loved. We bid you adieu for this moment. Adieu.